And then there's bridge. My favorite. I remember the year when we all dressed like Gary Buxton for his going away. Were you around for that? I still have the face for stroke and cheer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was good. When you leave the town of Canmore, good luck to you, because we have a pate. And it's generally really weird. We did like mini putt through the town from, no, we did mini putt through the town offices for our manager of planning that was leaving after 18 years.
All right, good morning, everyone. Happy Halloween. And I will call to order now the Finance Committee for October 31st, 2023. I would like to, acknowledge the land in which we're on, but in doing so, this morning as I was driving in on CBC, there was a story about immigration and, people waiting 8 years in a refugee camp, fleeing Afghanistan into Indonesia, finally made it to Canada. So this is a very special place, and so many of us that were born here could take it for granted, and we do so in forgetting about the history of it, and we also do so in forgetting about the incredible journey that some have had to get here. And so, we are incredibly blessed for the most part, and we have the ability to help those who are not as blessed. So in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I acknowledge that we are gathered in the heart of Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta. This land is home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, also the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and our most adjacent Indigenous neighbors, the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki First Nations. Further, we're located within Métis Nation of Alberta District 4. The town of Canmore is committed to working to live in right relations and to advance truth and reconciliation as we acknowledge the many Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. I'm grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and for those who have gone before us. As we are all treaty people, we each have ongoing responsibilities to protect and honor all life. Okay, so now looking to the agenda, no changes. I'll move that we approve it as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Got to get used to where I'm looking here for the votes. Now the minutes of April 24th, 23 Finance Committee meeting. Any errors or omissions? I don't know which Councillor Hillstad to look at for... Yes, Councillor...
I feel some of the formatting was off.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
It's a feeling.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
Wow. It's going to be a long day.
I move that we approve the minutes of April 24th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting as circulated. All those in favor?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. I expect a lot of dittos out of you today. And giving your phone number at every opportunity. All right. I honestly don't know what to do now. Okay, we're going to move into our reports here. We have some guests with us today from Avail Chartered Professional Accountants. So D1 is our 2023 Pre-Audit Report. And welcome to the Finance Committee. I'm sorry you have to see this. Okay, and we'll just get you to hit the button there when you sit down. That way we can pick you up on the recording.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much for having Calvin and I here today to present to you. So the presentation that you see above essentially summarizes the pre-audit letter that we send out to the town prior to the commencement of our audit. So the letter starts off with saying that we have been engaged to audit the consolidated financial statements of the town for the year ended December 31st, 2023. We also prepare the income tax return and related schedules, and then we do a review engagement on the family and community support services as well. Under the purposes and scope of the examination in the pre-audit letter, it does note that management is going to be responsible for the financial statements, and then council will be responsible for management oversight. And then our responsibilities as auditors is going to be to identify and assess the risk of material misstatements. We are to understand the internal controls of the town. We evaluate the policies and estimates used in the financial statements. We conclude on the going concern assumption. So that's just the ability for the town to continue to operate for the foreseeable future. And then we evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements in accordance with the accounting standards for public sector entities. So this is where at the conclusion of the audit, we provide an audit opinion whether the financial statements present accordingly in such standards. So from there, for our audit plan, we use what is called a risk-based approach. So this is where we focus our audit work on areas that just have a higher risk of being materially misstated. So for the town, this typically is going to be your tangible capital assets, your grant revenues, your net assets, and due to the first year adoption of the asset retirement obligation, that's just going to get lumped into that higher risk area as well. So why are these higher risk? Essentially due to the dollar value that's associated behind these numbers, as well as the accounting just tends to be a little bit more complex. So essentially you just have that inherent risk that there could be a potential misstatement as a result. We do look at all areas in the financial statements, but then just in these specific areas, we focus just a little bit more time in those ones. So materiality, we plan to use a threshold of $2 million, which is the same as prior year. And then our audit approach. Here we use primarily three main procedures. So the first one is going to be test of controls. So that's where we test the key financial controls of the town just to ensure that they're working properly. When the controls are working properly, it just reduces the risk of errors from occurring because all of the transactions are going through all of those checks and balances, right? Test of details, a lot of work in here, so that's where we're taking source documentation, agreeing it into balances and transactions that have occurred during the year. And then our substantive analytical procedures just allow us to conclude whether the recorded amounts are reasonable within expectations. So that's where we often get your budget and see if actuals are comparable to budget. If not, why? Is there a reason? And we kind of do a conclusion overall on that. So this diagram gives a nice bird's-eye view as to the full audit process from beginning to end. So first one, pre-audit meeting, is us here today presenting to you the audit or the pre-audit letter. Then we're going to be moving into some preliminary work. So typically after this meeting, we'll start setting up discussions with managements just to get an idea as to what has happened during 2023. And we begin some of our preliminary testing at this time as well on the transactions that have happened during the year. Then we move into finalizing our audit plan, and then we conduct our field work where the bulk of our audit is done. After that, we will present to council the audit results, and then the last item is just finalize, follow up, and then we conclude our audit at that point in time. So key dates just to keep in mind for the audit timing is that fieldwork, our audit team comes out to the office typically the second week of March. We plan to present to council at the end of April, and then we do have that hard deadline to municipal affairs by May 1st, so that's where we submit the audited financial statements, the financial information return, and everything concludes by May 1st. Other items, so this will be the last slide. So the pre-audit letter essentially concludes that our audit procedures, they're mainly designed to come to an opinion on whether the financial statements are free from material misstatements. Our audit procedures aren't specifically designed to identify illegal acts, intentional misstatements, fraud. We're not conducting a forensic audit, it's a financial statement audit. However, if we do come across anything of concern, we'll bring it to council's attention along with management's, and then we just go from next steps from there. No major issues discussed with management prior to our appointments as auditors. We will be requesting written representation from management at the conclusion of the audit. So this happens every year. So essentially management just signs off on a letter that they have provided us with all of the information that we needed in order to conduct our audit. And then the last item that we'll emphasize to you is that Avail and all of our team members are completely independent of the town and any representatives of the town as well, which is key to having an auditor. And that's a pre-audit letter, essentially, in itself. Any questions?
Looking to see if there are any questions. We will go in camera in a moment
Okay.
for the auditor interview. But are there any questions right now? Seeing none, I will then move that we go in camera to prevent disclosure of personal evaluations in accordance with Section 17 sub 4 sub F of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. All of those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, so All right, then. We're back. And we'll move on to item D2, which is 2023 Economic Update from CIBC Wood Gundy Verbal Report. Assume we're being joined by Zoom.
It is literally horse and carriage.
What's that?
It's a horse and carriage. It's like, boom, 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 hey, boom, 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 hey. Hi. Drive safe.
Great, thank you. All right, Mr. Chall, welcome to the Finance, and Mr. Hobson, welcome to the Finance Committee.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
And the Zoom microphones are yours.
Fantastic. Well, happy Halloween, everybody. I see a few witch hats in there. So just by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know us, it's been a while since we've come out there in person due to COVID. James Hobson, and I'm joined with my colleague Chart Jahal, and we manage the long-term investment reserves for the town of Canmore for the last decade or so. So we're here this morning to give you an economic update. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, the world has changed pretty materially in the last year and a half, and even in the last 6 months. So we wanted to kind of give you an update on the key themes that we're seeing and how they might impact the town of Canmore going forward. So we hope this information is helpful in your decision-making processes. So I'm going to start out just by looking back, kind of see where we've come from and where kind of what got us to the point that we're in today. We're going to look ahead. I'm going to talk about inflation, which is huge on all taxpayers' minds and all councils' minds. Char and I work with 83 municipalities across Canada, mostly in Alberta, and this has been the hot topic, not surprisingly. We'll talk about the impact of higher interest rates, how that impacts the investments and your lending going forward. I'll turn it to Chart. We'll give you a growth forecast and kind of where we see that going forward for Canada and Alberta as a whole. We'll chat briefly about commodities, just given that we are in Alberta and they do have a big impact on our economy and provincial budgets. And then we'll finish up just touching on housing and construction. So looking back, more than 40 central banks have increased interest rates by at least 0.75% at once since the start of 2022. Now, this graph here just kind of geographically illustrates that this is not a Canadian problem, it's not a US problem, it's a global phenomenon. And essentially what led to this, it's sort of a whoopsie moment by the central banks. Now, during COVID, there was a ton of fiscal stimulus doled out by governments around the world. Interest rates were cut to near zero, and it led to a ton of different, what you'd kind of think of as imbalances in the economic and financial systems. To put it in context, a normal rate hike would be 0.25%. So to hike interest rates by 0.75% at a time, you're really saying, aggressively, we kind of made a big error and we need to fix this in a hurry. So what happened as central banks started increasing interest rates? Well, yields, which are what we refer to as the 10-year government bond yield, that's what impacts everything from your mortgage rates to your investment returns to your borrowing rates. Yields jumped in the last year and a half by the most of any full year since 1962. So truly unprecedented. We've never seen this before. And we saw the overnight rate in Canada go from near 0.25% all the way up to 5% today. We'll get into kind of where we see that going forward. But for now, the key things to note here, in terms of the investment implications for the town of Canmore's investment long-term reserves, a year and a half ago, Chart and I were struggling to get 2.5% to 3% on a bond. Yesterday, we launched a bond at 9.3%. That's a fully guaranteed, MGA compliant, principal guaranteed investment. So your range of returns now has gone from 2 to 3% all the way up to minimum 6%, all the way up to, in some cases, 10%. So what does this mean for the town? Your bottom line investment revenue should increase materially over the coming years. It's not something that happens overnight. It's going to be a process that takes time. But as we can reinvest these maturities and cash flows at higher interest rates, you should see that bottom line investment revenue number increase substantially. Just to kind of graphically illustrate what that looks like, what you're looking at here, the black line is the overnight, kind of the short-term interest rate, and the blue line would be your 10-year interest rate on the bonds. And you can see there, starting at the beginning of 2021, we saw this drastic spike in interest rates, which has impacted our lending rates. Obviously, I'm sure you're starting to notice. And the other point to note here, we've highlighted that the yield curve, which shows you what interest rate you get for bonds of different terms, actually inverted in the middle of last year. What that means is the investment world is willing to pay you more to own short-term bonds versus long-term bonds. The reason for that is the bond market is forecasting lower growth in the future going forward. A yield curve inversion is often a harbinger of recession. If you read any kind of finance research, yield curve inversion has preceded every recession in the last 50 years. It doesn't necessarily mean we're getting a recession, but it's one of those data points to kind of keep in mind. The other thing that this tells us is market participants, so investors, would rather lock in at lower interest rates for longer than keep their money in cash. So to the extent that we can, administration's been fantastic working with them, trying to optimize our cash versus our long-term investment reserves. If we can lock in, say, 6% for 5 years now, that is better than just leaving your cash at the same rate, because what happens is a year from now, if interest rates are lower, you're going to be reinvesting at lower interest rates. So that's all this graph is showing. So why did all this happen? Well, no surprise to anybody in the room. It was to fight inflation that won't go away. I'll walk into kind of the reasons why that happened. But this just shows you the consumer price index, the inflation rate in the US, the Eurozone, and the UK, so kind of the major economic zones around the world. US inflation is the black line, peaking around 8% in the middle of last year. The key thing here when you're thinking about inflation, and councils across the province are, I think it sounds simple, but it's often a concept that you've got to think about. The bill has already been incurred. So just because inflation has come down does not mean prices are coming down. Inflation is just a rate of change. So prices are still going higher. They're just going higher at a slower rate of change. That just shows you kind of the peak there, and then our forecasts going forward. The nice thing to think about, or came out this morning, for the Eurozone at least, which, you know, could it be indicative of North America as well. They just printed their lowest inflation reading in 2 years. So things are trending in the right direction, but we're still above what the central bank would like to see. So that's where we've come from. That's what got us to this point. What's our forecast going forward? So the good news, I kind of alluded to it, Canadian inflation is easing more than our peers. So we're on the right track, and I'll walk through the reasons why that's the case. The red line there is CPI in Canada. We're going to break it down for you granularly, so we can even show you what the forecasts are specifically for Alberta. The latest inflation readings are coming in around that sort of the mid 3%, which is sort of, it's still above the central bank's target, but it's trending in the right direction. So this kind of leans into our forecast going forward, in that the Bank of Canada is likely done cutting interest rates. The other thing to think of on this chart, the US inflation rate has been much stickier than in Canada, which means they're probably going to have to actually hike interest rates once or twice more to get their inflation under control, and I'll walk you through why. Okay, so the biggest contributing factor for why inflation has been such a stubborn beast is supply chain issues. This was caused by those massive kind of imbalances that were shock to the system during the COVID pandemic. The key line here to pay attention to, if we break inflation down into what we call demand-driven and supply-driven, The blue line there is your supply-driven inflation. This is due to, imbalances in the supply chain, so shipping disruptions, things like that, delays in manufacturing. And what you can see there is during 2022, 2023, there was massive supply-driven inflation. The good news there, though, is that that blue line has come all the way back down to the pre-pandemic trend, which is great news for the central bank and for us as municipalities for the inflation outlook going forward. So what's been stubborn and why we're still not back to that 2% target is that black line. That's the demand-driven inflation. The good news with the demand-driven inflation is that is something that we can actually have an impact on through monetary policy. So raising interest rates will bring that black line down, and I'm going to walk you through kind of what that story looks like right now. So no surprise, when you raise interest rates from near 0 to 5% in the space of a year and a half, households are starting to feel the pinch. So on the left there, it shows you the excess personal deposits, which is basically an aggregate of Canadians' excess savings versus the pre-pandemic trend. Now, during the pandemic, governments doled out a ton of fiscal stimulus. We couldn't go out, we couldn't travel, we couldn't eat out. So a lot of households saved a lot of excess personal deposits. Now, the trend that we're seeing here now, though, that red line on the left, is that personal deposits are starting to become depleted. And then on the right there, the credit balances, Canadian consumers are not only having to tap their excess savings, they're also starting to tap into their credit card balances and their revolving debt. So we're seeing those, the credit balances come back up to sort of the trends that we saw pre-COVID, and we expect that to continue. Canadian monetary policy. So the only tool we have really to bring that inflation rate down is to play around with interest rates. You can raise them and lower them to move that number around. Now, the question we get asked is, if you recall the sort of 1987 to 1990s interest rate hiking cycle, that sounded like at the time, because they hiked interest rates by even more than they have now, people would think that, okay, that period was worse than it is now. But what happens is if you adjust that to reflect the larger amount of debt that Canadian consumers have, that's the middle bar, that's what it looks like if you adjust the 1987 and 1990s rate hiking cycle to reflect today's level of debt. And then on the right bar there, that shows you the current cumulative hike in interest rates. So all of this to say, the current rate hiking cycle has more of an impact. It's been more dramatic than what was seen in that last drastic rise in interest rates. The other thing to note there on the right is that the effectiveness of monetary policy has been going up for the last 40 years. That just shows you the negative impact to consumer spending for every 1% hike in interest rates. And as you can see there, for every 1% hike in interest rates, you're essentially reducing consumer spending by 2%. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but consumer spending is the driver of the economy. And if you raise rates by close to 5%, well, in theory, you're taking roughly 10% of consumer spending out of the economy. So that's why we're seeing things starting to slow down. I mentioned that the US is probably going to have to hike interest rates once or twice more, which is kind of different to what we're going to see here in Canada, and Chart's going to walk you through that. The US economy was much more overheated than in Canada. This just shows you the change in contribution to demand from various sectors of the economy. Now, the biggest ones would be goods spending and services spending. The change from sort of pre-pandemic to now in the US was materially larger for goods spending, services spending, business investment than we saw in Canada. So the US economy, they cut interest rates to basically zero, and at the same time they doled out a tremendous amount of fiscal stimulus. So that's why we're seeing the differences between sort of Canada and the US. This also kind of lends to the thesis that you should see a weaker Canadian dollar going forward. Now, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this just shows you why we think interest rates have peaked. The full hit from the higher interest rates has yet to be seen. The issue that Governor Macklem has at the Bank of Canada is that it's not an overnight hit to the economy. If I raise interest rates tomorrow, it doesn't mean that Canadian consumers have to pay more tomorrow. It takes time for those interest rate hikes to move their way through the system. Now, what this is showing you is that by that middle bar there, by the end of 2024, so basically a year from now, about 60% of mortgages are going to be subject to higher payments, whether that's variable or 5-year rates. So the difference between the US and Canada, if I buy a house in the US, I can lock my interest rate in for 30 years. So they need to hike rates more to have that impact. But in Canada, most people have either variable rate mortgages or 5-year fixed. And the vast majority of these are going to be reset over the coming couple of years. So the full impact has yet to be seen, and it is going to have a drag on growth. Now, what are we seeing so far? So I mentioned that by the end of next year, we're going to see a large change in mortgage payments. Now, we are starting to see early signs of stress. Just this morning, the growth number came out at essentially 0 for Q3. That was a huge shock because the Bank of Canada was expecting growth of 0.8%. We are starting to see early signs of stress to consumers. I mentioned that monetary policy has a bigger impact than it did in the past, particularly if you look at on the right there, unsecured lines of credit and installment loans. People are starting to get behind on their payments for those types of borrowing products. And lastly, for my part of this presentation, we called it Locked Out. This is, I think, quite relevant to the town of Canmore, just with the housing prices. Housing affordability is now at its worst level since 1985. So almost 40 years, we haven't seen it so expensive for your average consumer to afford a home. This chart here, it's from the US data because they just have more data, better data. It shows you the income that you need to cover the median price home with the 20% down payment. So something to keep in mind. The residents of Alberta, particularly Toronto, Vancouver, we're seeing mass immigration here because household affordability, particularly in Toronto, Vancouver, is so high. People are moving here, working remotely. They can get a house for cheaper, which is a trend that we think will continue. Okay, Chart, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, James. So inflation is high. It's coming down. We're not there yet. Canada significantly more sensitive than the US in terms of rate hike cycles. So taking the next step of what we kind of see starting with, for specifically for Canada in the terms of a growth forecast, well, a couple interesting things that we can look at looking back down to 2019 to where we are today. If we take a look at this chart here, that dotted blue line at the top is kind of the pre-COVID trend of where GDP and growth was kind of forecast to. And then the light shaded gray line was the monetary policy report from the Bank of Canada in January 2022. Basically, they were saying, yes, growth is down, but we're going to get back to that trend by 2024. What we've seen come out kind of April this year and in further meetings since then is a lot of hedging by the Bank of Canada. Basically, they're basically now aiming for a lower level of demand because of that inflation being a lot stickier than it was. They didn't forecast for that. So now they're actually aiming for a lower level of demand going forward, which if you think about it, makes sense. You're raising interest rates to make things less affordable. You want to pull that demand level down. So aiming for a demand level that's below the pre-COVID trend makes sense. So overall, we're aiming for a lower level of demand here from the Bank of Canada, which kind of sets up a differentiator between us and the US. Canada is not in a recession, not in a technical recession yet, but there is a larger and larger sentiment that's starting to be built out there right now that Canada has to cut interest rates before the US. Large in part where you generally wait for them to do what they're doing. The best way to think about the Canadian economy or the Canadian market is the US is the sun and we are the earth that kind of goes around their gravitational pull. We don't have a lot of tools to kind of work around that. But something very interesting is happening that's kind of setting up, again, us cutting interest rates before them. The first is if we look at the real GDP growth numbers by themselves in both Canada and the US, they look like very strong numbers. The US, I think it was just over 3.5, 3-ish% of growth in the US. If we adjust that number in Canada for GDP output per capita, the amount of output we're getting for adjusted for the population, we can see that that's coming down. So our growth in Canada is actually starting to come down. We aren't seeing it in the per capita numbers in the US side yet, but on our side, it is coming down. So just kind of starting that case for we're going to need to cut rates before they are. On the US side, yes, we're going to need to cut rates. We're not there yet. If we look at the US GDP numbers, again, alone in isolation, it looks like a very strong print and very strong numbers. However, if you look at what's called GDI, GDI is gross domestic income. It's a measure of all the income earned for the production of goods and services. So for the amount of cost you incur to get that GDP number, what is the actual income you're producing off of that? That's GDI. It's another way of measuring US economic activity. If we look at GDP by itself, it shows a very strong number. But if you look at the actual return and interest we're getting, interest income we're getting off those strong numbers, that's starting to trend down. So a very similar trend. Canada is leading in terms of our contraction. The US, it's a lagged effect. They're going to get it coming soon. So first case, yes, we can kind of see signs at a high level that Canada is going to start to cut rates. Let's peel back another layer to kind of see what that looks like on a quarterly by quarterly basis. A lot of data here. You're basically looking at on the front half of that chart, a quarterly forecast for real GDP growth. Why is that important? You heard me say we're not in a technical recession yet. For any economist or anybody to call an actual recession, the technical definition is you need 2 negative quarters back to back for it to be a technical recession. Now, if you look at the first half there, minus 0.2, and I think the latest one was flat for that came out this morning for Q3. We're about as close as you can get to not having to call a technical recession without it actually being one. But the reality is by the time you're talking about a recession, most likely you're already there. But we're getting very close to a recession. The conversation becomes you'll hear things about soft landing, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. A couple other interesting things to take away from here is the inflation data, and specifically on the Canada side, all items, inflation, CPI. Basically, what we're looking at here is, James kind of alluded to it, based on the way the Canadian economy is structured and set up, and we're not as overheated as the US, our inflation data is coming down faster. So if you look about mid-years, we kind of see the inflation number getting back to the Bank of Canada's 2% target. Once we get there, that's when we're going to start to see interest rates get cut. In the US, not mid next year. It's going to take a little bit longer to get to that 2% inflation, 2% inflation target. And then unemployment kind of trending around that 5.96% number along the way. Now, the key thing I wanted to kind of touch on here is we may have heard it on, if we pay attention to news, is soft landing. Can the US economy or the Canadian economies have a soft landing? Well, what is a soft landing? It's basically when the central bankers can raise interest rates enough to cause enough pain to slow the economy down without triggering a recession. That's a soft landing. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we can cut the data. Myself and James were generally in the camp of most likely there's going to be a recession. From a data standpoint, this is the data. This is the actual economic data. The data doesn't point to signs of a recession. But if we look at actual history, we can kind of see a couple interesting articles to kind of point to you guys to kind of make light of it, I guess, a little bit. You can actually track in Bloomberg the number of news articles mentioning soft landing. And as every time it's spiked, literally every time it's spiked, going back to 95, there and after, every time they predicted a soft landing, we've gotten an actual recession. So every time the news article starts talking about soft landings, realistically, most likely you're going to get a recession that's what history tells us. The other interesting piece is to always remember is when the banks get strict, it usually means a recession. So that's what you're looking at here. Both large, medium, and small size firms, every time they get very strict in their lending, that generally means historically that a recession is coming around the corner. Obviously because banks take things like loan loss provisions, it's very hard in economic cycles to have those credit defaults happening. So when banks get strict, it's another sign of recession. So can we have a soft landing? Maybe. We're more in the camp of most likely a recession is to come. However, even if that recession does come from a if we look at it, as James mentioned, to a granular level by provincial, by how we stack up against our peers, Alberta is set up a little bit different. We kind of have a little bit of an inverse economy from all of our peers, largely because of our commodity base. If we look at the GDP forecast for 2023, Alberta about 2.3%, Canada as a whole 1.3%. So we're going to lead the pack in terms of the GDP forecasting growth this year. Very similar story next year, 1.5% versus 0.7. That's largely going to be commodity driven. And then the other interesting thing to note is on the far right hand side is inflation. We're actually going to be trending lower than the Canada as a whole, 3.9 versus 3.5%. And then going out to 2025, long-term forecast for inflation around that 2%. So Canada, as it's set up right now, and I'll get into the commodity sector in a little bit here, a little bit better faring to the higher interest rate cycle than all of our peers because that housing market cycle as well. So overall growth coming down, most likely a recession. Whether they can get a soft landing or not, we don't know yet. The other key question is, okay, rate cuts are going to happen. Interest rates can't stay this high for this long. So when they do come down, what is that new normal? What does a rate cut new normal actually look at? The chart you're looking at here looks pretty technical. It's fairly straightforward. It's the red line is the Bank of Canada's neutral estimate. This is basically a estimate of what rate would the Bank of Canada have to set interest rates to make the economy neither stimulative nor detract nor a slowdown in growth. So basically, what is the neutral rate of interest rates to neither stimulate or detract the economy? And then the gray line is where the actual interest rate has been going back to 2005. From 2005 to right before COVID, that number where the interest rates have actually been has been below. So it's always been in a stimulative environment. The reason for that is inflation has actually been very hard to actually get to 2%. We've always trended below the 2% target. So historically, we've actually had a very hard time of actually creating inflation in Canada. We've actually had pockets of deflation. Cars had near zero inflation for a very long time. Now, structurally, what COVID has done is it's actually pushed that it actually flipped the cycle completely, where it's going to be hard to keep inflation down as these supply chain factors continue to go, and things like deglobalization, America first, buy domestic, all that kind of trend kind of continues. We're going to see the Bank of Canada's overnight rate stay above that neutral rate. Now, where does it stay above the neutral rate? The first thing we'll look at is the CIBC forecast. So how much higher, lower rates needed by 2025 to avoid a big refinancing hit? The first thing we can look at is mortgages, as James alluded to. Yes, by I think 60% by the end of 2024 of all mortgages in Canada will be subject to the higher rates. Now, on the left-hand side of the chart there, as you're looking at the Canadian bond yields, the 5-year bond yields, that's very important because that's kind of your benchmark for where you see mortgage rates happening. On the right-hand side there, on the gray bar, if the 5-year rates stay where they currently are and the Bank of Canada doesn't cut rates, in 2024, that's a 15% increase to your monthly mortgage payment. In 2025, 20%, 2026, 25% monthly increases. So massive impact if rates stay where they are. If rates come down, they're going to come down. If they come down to where the CIBC economics forecast is, there's still going to be an impact. That impact's going to be a 10% monthly increase to your mortgage payments. So overall, we see interest rates coming down. They're going to come down a lot, but not to COVID levels of, I'm going to call it free debt of like 2% fixed-year mortgages. Now, specifically, where do we think the overnight happening, the rates are where they're going to go to? The overnight target rate in Canada sitting around 5%. As James mentioned, we don't think the Bank of Canada needs to raise rates anymore. There's a lot of economic tools and measures you can do to stress test an economy. Every single simulation and every formula that's out there, if you run it, it says the Bank of Canada doesn't need to go above 5%. But James and me are done predicting when the Bank of Canada is going to stop raising interest rates, because who knows at this point, they've gone to an unprecedented level. The more important piece is mid next year, those interest rate cuts are going to start to come. And when they do come, they're going to come fast, going from 5 all the way down to 3.5 by the end of 2024, and then a target of 2.5 by the end of 2025. So coming down materially. And the other line to kind of anchor you to here is the 10-year government bond number on the Canada side. Right now is around 4%. That one trending down all the way back down to 2.95% and 3% close to by the end of next year. So overall interest rates going to come down more to a normal interest rate cycle that we were all used to. You're talking like the 2000s interest rate cycles, not the dirt cheap interest that we've been lucky to have for quite some time. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on commodities. Alberta, very insulated to the national economic slowdown because of our commodity cycle. Right now, oil is sitting around $82. It's sitting in a very tight range. I've seen forecasts like $120. I've seen forecasts like $40. It largely depends on what your viewpoint is. There's two things that are happening that are creating the volatility in the price of oil. One is interest rates are high, demand is coming down, so the overall growth, if demand is coming down and growth is coming down, that's kind of a detractor to pull commodities down. On the flip side, you have massive amounts of geopolitical risk across the globe with wars kind of going out there. Anytime there's geopolitical risk, stripping out the human capital element of it, Alberta and Canada will be positioned fairly well because there's only so many other areas you can get these physical resources from. So that's pushing it to the upside. So for me personally, we're sitting in that $82 range. Most likely 90, it's going to be a wider range, a lot of volatility. $70 to $90 is kind of where we kind of forecast that going forward. So overall, it's an interesting economic update we're giving you, right? Like interest rates are going to stay elevated till we get that inflation number to come down. We are kind of near the end of that cycle. It is going to start coming down next year. The majority of that pain has been felt. Now, I do not want to leave you guys without some pockets of positivity in an economic update. So specifically here in Alberta, our population and labor force growth are helping us find a stronger footing in the housing sector. Alberta, as James kind of mentioned, I think last quarter, 66,000 net migration to Alberta. That includes both immigration and migration to Alberta, which is a crazy amount of new households coming into the province. So obviously that's helping boost our resales here in Alberta. Now, if we look at that on another scale, this is the trend here for Canada as a whole. The amount of households massively increasing through immigration and just new entrants into the market. So households from a demand side is spiking quite materially, and housing starts have started to come down. So if supply is coming down and demand is going up, there's only one thing to look at that's going to happen with housing prices. So overall, residential properties will continue to go up. Now, I don't envy the people that have to kind of essentially fix this issue from a national perspective, because if we actually take a look at the recent surge in the population trend, it's actually the population trend pre-COVID. You can see that dotted grade line on the left-hand side there. Pre-pandemic trend, that's where we would forecast the population. We're well above that, right, in terms of our Canadian population, and that's not going to come down, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. And on the far right-hand side here, from a housing starts perspective, the gray line is the current housing completion rate, and then the forecast for it going forward. The red line, that big gap to the top, is the pace needed to catch up with the current population growth. So that's to catch up, not even to meet the current level of demand, let alone cause a detractor to the housing. So from an overall perspective, you still have supply going up, and that's not going anywhere. You have demand going up, that's not going anywhere. And supply can't keep up. Now, a lot of people say, okay, let's just build a lot of new houses. Yes, however, the number of construction workers under construction, Canada just doesn't have qualified labor. If you were to take every construction worker out there, put them to work right now, they cannot keep up. We don't have enough construction workers to meet the current pace of demand for housing starts. And then on the other side, another interesting trend going all the way back to 1990, the amount of time it's taking, completion starts, is taking longer and longer and longer. So there's less and less and less people there's less people qualified to create the construction, and construction is taking longer and longer and longer. So overall, this is going to basically persist the housing affordability. From an Alberta perspective, that's what's causing a lot of migration to continue to come to Alberta. We don't see that going anywhere anytime soon. Now, just kind of summing it up, because I want to leave time for some questions for you guys as well. The Alberta economy has a better chance of defying a gravitational pull of higher interest rates, better than our peers in the country. Inflation in Canada has eased more than in other countries, which is going to allow for interest rates cuts to happen earlier in our country versus others. It's specifically in the US. Characteristics in a post-pandemic world mean a longer lag between rate hikes and a slowdown, but it's not going to prevent one. Whether you have a actual recession or a soft landing, both of those situations are the economy contracting. It is pain, but pain is not necessarily a bad thing here. The quicker we feel pain, the quicker we're on the other side of this, where we can get to interest rate cuts to get back into a normal level of economy. Rapid immigration and population growth is adding to inflation in housing, but also filling job vacancies and helping ease inflation in other areas. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. And interest rates come in 2024. How far and how quickly they cut will be different than other cycles because of those supply constraints. Now, with that, significant amount of data for you guys in a short amount of time, but we want to make sure we save time for questions as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, one of the counselors just read my mind too. Feeling a little down. So I'm looking to see if there are any questions.
You guys are letting us off easy this time.
Councillor Ma?
So it sounds like, I just wanted to like recap, like sometime in mid 2024, interest rates will probably start descending. And possibly by the end of 2024, I can't quite remember what you guys said, like crystal ball, I know like this is all guessing, like you think we'll be sitting around 3%, 3.5%, somewhere between?
Yeah, so about the forecast right now, again, economists love holding things constant in a world that nothing stays constant, but the forecast right now is for the end of 2024 for the overnight rates, that's the Bank of Canada's rate, to end at 3.5%, with the 10-year number sitting around 3.2%, which should put mortgage numbers around that 4.5, 5 rate number if you look at where mortgages are. But yeah, so Bank of Canada overnight rate around 3.5 by the end of next year, and then if the inflation continues to go where it is, 2.5 by the end of 2025.
Thank you. Councillor Graham?
That was a lot of information. I usually absorb that pretty well, but that was a lot. Two things. Have you got inflation numbers for Alberta?
Yes, Charles, want to bring that up?
Yeah, so here, let me just share this again here. Where did... So the inflation numbers for Alberta will be on the far right-hand side there. For 2023, the forecast is 3.5%, 2024, 2.6%, and then 2% thereafter.
Thank you. Did you get that? No. Are you guys going to send us that slide deck? Can you send us?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, please. Yeah.
The Alberta numbers?
Yeah, it was.
And then I guess my main concern right now is if housing values stay high, elevated, and interest rates don't come down, what would that look like?
It's kind of it's going to you're going to have one or two of those triggers. It's going to naturally have to come down because people don't have the ability to qualify for these mortgages as they're renewing into these things are just getting more expensive. With the higher prices is helping insulate from a higher interest rate cycle, if that makes sense, right? Because you can get out of your higher price, more house, even if you need to downsize, it helps you kind of insulate. So all that would do is kind of shift from the real estate market in terms of the internal demographics, where we're seeing that demand kind of shift too. But James, do you want to add to that as well?
I think the biggest is an excellent question. I think the biggest contributing factor is going to be the continued immigration to Alberta. If we're looking at things that impact the town of Canmore, that's going to keep housing elevated. I think that's going to have a bigger impact, and also the lack of construction workers and the longer time to complete new housing development projects. I think that's going to outweigh any change in interest rates. But to directly answer your question, if interest rates stay high, it will pressure housing lower. But again, I think those other factors are going to have a bigger impact.
Yeah, and then so another way to think about it, if that what you said happens, housing prices stay high and interest rates stay high, it's just going to delay when those interest rates cuts kind of happen. It's going to push it out a little bit longer.
And it'd also mean more pain for consumers and slower growth.
Yeah. Yeah. What would keep interest rates high?
If inflation does not come down.
Inflation doesn't come down. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Seeing none. Mr. Chaw, Mr. Hobson, thank you for joining us today. And I just hope that your predictions are met or even surpassed. We'll see. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
We'll now move to item D3, and just to let everybody know, after D3, we will take a break. Okay, so the D3 is the 2023 financial report year-to-date as at August 31st. Ms. Beeswash?
Yes. I don't have a presentation, just for questions, but happy to answer questions.
Okay. Then everybody was provided with the briefing. And I appreciate the heads up of where there's decreases and increases projected, but of course, always timing comes into play, right? Looking to council. Just give everybody a moment to flip through in case it triggers something that they were wanting to ask. Councillor Graham?
Paid parking revenue is 1.9 million, budgeted 1.15. That's significantly higher than we had anticipated. Our plans for that. I know.
Mr. McKay?
Yes, so that number's a forecast. When you say, I missed the second part of your question.
What are we doing with that surplus?
Sure. You know, I might suggest that we'll, not the next finance committee meeting, but the one after, so next week, we have a fairly robust discussion planned for paid parking revenues. So rather than off the cuff suggest a couple of things. Ms. Biswas and I will go through it then if that works for you.
Fair enough. I'll look forward to that conversation.
And that relates to our PRAM discussion,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on the financial report to August 31st? Councillor Ma?
Thank you. So on Town of Canmore Solid Waste Services roll-up, which is page 27, under supplies and energy, we had a pretty big jump there, the 72%, and that was like, says here, due to purchase of carts to expand commercial food waste services. And then number 2, garbage bags and mutt mitt volumes. I'm assuming the bulk of that was more the commercial carts as opposed to the mutt mitts. Otherwise, I think we should charge for those. It's a lot of doggy bags. Yeah. Is there a breakdown between those two? I'm just trying to understand. What's the ratio like of that 72% bump up? Was the vast majority of that from mutt mitts, or is that from more of the commercial waste bins? Like, and how do we get caught out so far on that? That's all.
I can bring back the information.
Yeah, that'd be
I don't
great.
have it
Awesome.
right
Thank you.
now. Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Councillor Graham?
Just with the overall budgets, was there a breakdown between permits and fines?
Which page are you looking at?
attachment 1, page 12. It's the overall budget. Permits and fines were $2.2 million. And I just was curious about the split between actual permits and actual fines.
1.6 in licenses and permits, and 540 in
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, let's take a 10% or 10%.
Ditto.
Nice. That was a good joke.
Yeah. And let's take a 10-minute break. Come back at 10:21.
Okay.
We're good? Okay, we're back. Now we're moving to item D4, 2024 operating budget amendment, status quo. Who will be presenting? Ms. Rogers.
Thank you. So just a quick overview of today's agenda. We have completed our first 3 items, so we'll spend the balance of the day reviewing the operating budget amendments. We're bringing you back status quo budget and just want to show you the impact of inflation, as you heard in the previous conversation. And then we've got a couple of options for you as well that we'll be bringing forward to discuss. Just a quick overview of our upcoming meetings. So November 2nd, this Thursday, we'll be reviewing the amended capital plan as well as the utility rate model. Then next week, as Mr. Mackay mentioned, we have an overview of the transit requisition as well as the circling back to the PRAM discussion, which is the paid parking revenue allocation model, and then also bringing you some options for consideration for parking for next year. We've set aside 2 days of deliberation if they're required, and then plan to bring this budget back to you as council on December 5th for approval.
Can I just add there, for that schedule, there's those 2 days of deliberations. It would be helpful for us to get a sense from you today or November 2nd on Thursday, if you're looking for changes or to either the operating or capital budget. Just for us, the turnaround time from the 14th to the 16th is really quick. So if we can have a sense as early as possible, if there's anything you want more information or changes on for the Finance Committee to let us know as that comes up. We'd rather have things that you're interested in and then change your mind about and we don't need than to be scrambling in between those 2 dates. So at the end of the meeting, if we could maybe just leave some time to do a check-in and see where you're at with what you've heard today and give us that feedback, that would be really helpful.
Thanks. That's it. Okay, so just a bit of an overview for you. As a reminder, this year's budget is really just an opening of the budget for any required amendments. Last year, you approved 2-year budget, so budget for 2023 and a budget for 2024. And also both on the operating, and on the capital side. Operating amendments really were the exception, except for things that were extraordinary, unexpected, or emergent since that budget was approved. And on the capital side, we are seeing more changes than we normally would in the second year of the approved budget. And that really is due to the Cougar Creek flood mitigation structure and the changes that we've had to make to help fund that. So we'll spend Thursday talking about the impacts of that and how we've managed to work that into the capital plan. Okay. So supervisors and managers, as is normal in a year of budget, have spent time reviewing their budgets, brought forward any changes or recommendations that they had to their GMs, and then as a CST, we've reviewed and prepared the budget that we're presenting for you today. And again, important to remember that those changes or amendments really are only extraordinary, unexpected, or emergent. Okay, this budget we still feel is a status quo budget. We're presenting you the cost to deliver the services that we currently have and that we currently offer, and just reflecting what today's cost to deliver those services is. By way of a bit of a reminder, I just wanted to review the motions that were made resulting in some follow-up in this budget process. So there were some motions from the Finance Committee last year, as well as a few motions throughout the year. So we'll be reviewing the paid parking revenue allocation model next Thursday, again, November 9th. Mr. Mackay will be reviewing the community evaluator position. Just as a reminder, you had asked us to bring that back to you this budget cycle, so it was approved last year for 1 year, and then we'll be presenting that to you as an option. Options for car share program will be coming to the November Committee of the Whole meeting, so they're not necessarily directly related to this particular budget, but we will be circling back to that in November. COW. You'd asked us to reassess the Canmore Community Housing requisition, so we've got some information for you on that today. We'll also do a quick overview of the provincial downloading, which we now have as part of our practice included in our annual budget process. The master fee schedule has been updated. Council also approved increases to franchise fees. Ms. Biswas will speak to that shortly. Then you directed us to bring a revised 2024 to 2028 capital plan and reallocate funding in the capital plan towards the Cook Creek long-term mitigation project. And again, we'll be reviewing that in detail on Thursday. So just a bit of a reminder of the things that you'd asked us to do and that we'll be going through them all in the next few meetings. As you just heard on the, I think, somewhat depressing CIBC update, the pressures and challenges that we faced in last year's budget really have continued to impact the town today. And we're really seeing similar impact in municipalities across the province and indeed across the country. Edmonton, as one example, is looking at more than a 2% tax increase from their originally approved plan, mostly due to higher energy costs and payroll costs that are impacted by inflation. So it's a very similar story to what we're seeing. We had assumed last year, using the Calgary long-term economic forecast for 2024, we'd assumed a COLA of 2.6. And that now has come in at 5.5. So really significant change in that cost of living number. And as you heard again from CIBC, it is a bit of crystal balling. Hard to predict what's happening that far in advance. We continue to see decreasing funding in terms of grants from all levels of government, so from the province and also federally, and that impacts our ability to fund work and requires that we find different ways to fund the projects that we have ahead of us. Power and natural gas costs have continued to rise, and that does impact us with the number of facilities that we're operating, so we do see that across the board. And then we are seeing some increases in our contracted services costs as the organizations that are providing us with service are facing these same inflationary issues that we are. During the budget process in 2022, Finance Committee had directed administration to include an annual summary of the impacts of provincial downloading. In 2024, our estimation of that impact is close to $5 million. And that's made up of a combination of funding reductions, so decreases in grants or program funding, changes to programs, or elimination of programs that were historically funded by the provincial government. And we've included the detail of that sheet. I didn't put it up on the screen because it would be impossible to read. It's quite a detailed spreadsheet, but in your package on page 72, or attachment 6 of your package, we've outlined again for you by division what these provincial downloading impacts are. And so we're happy to speak to any questions that you might have about that, but again, very similar story to last year. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. So for the fine retention, went to 50% to the province. What was it prior, the year before? Was it 40%? Just trying to remember how much like the province takes for all those tickets and how big of a jump we had this last year.
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can get it.
Yeah, it's the first line, traffic fine revenue.
Yeah, now it's 50.
Yeah.
So yeah, just curious. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say that, but I was like, I don't know, that's right, and then, no, don't be silly.
Any other? Gosh, go ahead, Mark. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this may be a question for the mayor, but do we have any idea of what level other municipalities are experiencing in the similar downloading?
No, I don't think that information has been fully collected yet. Based on Canmore's letter to the province, then President of Alberta Municipalities, Kathy Heron, sent it all member municipalities and asked them to participate in a survey. I think this survey, if it's still open, or it might just be recently closed, but I don't think that there's been any information flowing from that yet. I can certainly follow up with Dan Rood at Alberta Municipalities for that. Go ahead, Councillor Graham.
What's our plan for this $5 million number? Like, what do we want to do with that? What do we, it's great to have this number. Now, what do we?
Well, it's for reference. We provide it to the province. It's for reference during advocacy. Alberta Municipalities is seeking more funding along with the other organizations, and it's good information for that. But outside of that, there's very little we can do. We can't send a bill. We can't demand anything. So.
Thank you. Yeah, as long as we're still using it prudently, then I think that's a great number to keep having.
Okay. Just one moment. Any other questions at this point? On the downloading, looks to me the biggest increases are around affordable housing, the amounts around traffic fines, and then the usual increases on things that have been de-indexed and that sort of thing. Also the increase with the RCMP. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the details of the long-term changes to municipal sustainability funding or the new LGFF local government fiscal framework have still not been finalized, so we don't have a sense there of how our grant funding will shake out in the future. So we continue to participate in advocacy and meetings with Alberta municipalities, but there hasn't been any movement on that. Councillor Faubert.
What year is the LGFF supposed to come into play? Next year? So we don't have any numbers for our budget for next year from the province about it. Okay, thank you.
So we've been advised that when Mid-Sized Cities was meeting with the Premier, she advised that we'd have some sense of direction by the end of this year, and the full details will be provided in February or March with the budget.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to the status quo budget, we've broken that budget down, or the amendments that we're going to be reviewing with you, into three large buckets. We have some operating amendments that have a tax impact. There are some operating amendments that have offsetting revenues or a contribution from reserves, resulting in no tax impact. And then we've got some operating amendments with offsetting reserves that are policy-based that also have no tax impact. So we just tried to group the changes into those buckets to make it a little bit more manageable. So looking at our operating impacts that affect taxes, we do have a couple of positive changes on the revenue side. We are seeing an increased trend in fire first response revenue, so we've increased that budget line by $50,000 just based on our year-to-date trends. And we're also looking at an anticipated increase in recreation membership fees for $200,000, so that's good news. And then we did hear in that CIBC investment, the one bit of good news they had with rising interest rates is that our investment income will see some increase from that. I don't know that it offsets the negative impact, but certainly it helps. We'll take what we can get there. On the expenditure side, really the biggest impact that we're seeing is this adjustment for cost of living. And again, in my previous slide, I mentioned we had estimated 2.6%, and our annual calculation that we use to inform the actual next year's budget is that July over June CPI figure from the City of Calgary, and that has come in at 5.5%. So quite a bit higher than we were anticipating. The net impact of that is $550,000. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We are also seeing an increase in employee benefits. Last year, we saw a small increase there that largely was due to CPI and EI increases. This year, those increases really are, again, the impact of inflation on our health and dental medical providers. Those costs are going up, and we're seeing that net impact to the organization of $40,000. Power and natural gas, cumulatively across the organization, we're estimating will cost us $125,000 more. As a reminder, we are adding custodial and snow and ice removal services for the old fire hall. We're using that facility largely for municipal enforcement, some parks, and some facilities. And so those functions were typically performed by the fire department staff when they were there, and we're needing to add that service. We had shared that with you when we brought the facility use framework for you, just as a reminder what that's about. On the IT side, we are seeing some increase in that contract services piece that I mentioned. Again, this trickle-down effect of inflation on those that are providing contracted services to us. And this would be for contracts that don't have prices locked in or where we're up for renewal on a particular contract. So, then the net impact on the RCMP contract, we have at about $200,000. So the increase that we've seen is $222,000. One of the items that was brought forward in that budget request from the RCMP was the addition of body-worn cameras, and we've made an assumption with the timing of when those cameras will come in, as well as the timing of the RCMP budget, that we can cut that back slightly. So it's not removing those body-worn cameras, we're just really trying to anticipate the timing of when those expenses will occur and adjusting that there. Did you have a question, Mayor Krauser?
Not yet. I am looking for something, but go ahead.
Okay. We are reducing or eliminating the feral rabbit management program. So again, you'll all remember that we had the RHDV, rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, this past year, which really has essentially decimated our rabbit population, and so we are expecting no longer to need to contract services to work on that. Yeah, nature has helped us. Go ahead.
Thank you. How do we ensure that little pockets of rabbits we might not know about don't repopulate over time?
Go ahead.
Our officers are out in, I would say, semi-wild areas, Quarry Lake, those kind of places, and throughout the community quite often, and we'll keep an eye out for that. But rather than budget just in case, if we were looking at an operational change like that, we need to discuss that after the observation as opposed to having it just in case.
And I do believe, sorry, just to add to that, we did keep this money intentionally in last year's budget and worked with the contractor to check for that last winter. And I believe they found none?
None or very, very few.
So we did spend a year monitoring with the contractor before removing it from the budget. Yeah.
I would know, I've heard anecdotally that Exshaw has bonnies. So.
Feel their pain, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just.
We can give them advice.
Need to build a wall, a rabbit-proof wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, on this amendments with a tax impact, we have seen an increased requisition request from the museum. And this is related, again, I would say, to the impacts of inflation and cost of living. They have struggled in finding a director, museum director for the budget that they had. They're just simply not able to fill that position, so they've requested a small bump there. And that is the high-level overview. Again, we'll get into a couple of these items in a bit more detail as we move on, but I will pause there if there are any questions or if there's something you'd like any of us to speak to in a bit more detail. Go ahead.
Mr. Ma?
So with the RCMP contract, I know we're on the new 90% threshold. Was it last year, I think, when they wanted to like maybe add another member or two to the complement? But the trap to that is if we took that person on, we would also have to cover their back pay from the contract negotiations. Like, did we fall into that sort of situation where they added another person, now we're on the hook for back pay for new staff? Okay, great, thank you.
We have to make sure that we provide verbal responses. Mr. Mackay, you indicated no, that's not the case?
That's not the case. There's been no increase to staffing in the past year.
Great, thanks. That's just in case people couldn't see on the screen.
Just a reminder that we are still helping phase in those expenses with a draw from tax stabilization. We haven't highlighted it here because there's no change. We really are trying to focus on the changes, but that we're using that tax stabilization to smooth that RCMP impact in over a few years. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to operating amendments that have no tax impact, and we've got two pieces here to review. So we have received an increased transit requisition, and again, we'll spend quite a bit of time on November 9th reviewing that. As a bit of a teaser, we are proposing that we fund that increase from paid parking revenue. But again, we'd like to really go into that, both a review. We'll have actually Martin Bean from the Transit Commission here to join us on November 9th to be able to review that budget ask and also to answer any questions that you have. And then it really does fit well with the discussion on paid parking revenue and that allocation model. The second item there, we are proposing the addition of a senior development planner in planning and funding that with what we're expecting in terms of increased revenue, really as a result of the advancement of the Three Sisters file. That Whitney is actually today with them and with our planning team doing a kickoff meeting, so that work has begun. And you will see things start to happen quite rapidly there. And that will continue for quite some time. And so we really feel we need to resource that effectively in order to keep that work moving and be able to meet the timelines that we're required to meet legislatively around advancing that file. With it, though, comes an increase in revenue. And so we're really saying this position will be offset by the fees that we will get there. And then Canmore Community Housing has requested an increase to their requisition of $250,000. And so historically, their requisition has been $450,000. That was one of the motions that Finance Committee had made last year, was to ask us to work with them just to review, is that actually sufficient for their operation? Now with a new executive director in place, the board has submitted this increased requisition to address some staffing required to really advance their housing projects. They also will need to find a larger space for a larger team. They really have been in the space they're in for quite some time, and it doesn't meet their ongoing future needs. And so just a bit of additional background here. We have had historically had a higher levy and use the difference between the levy amount and the requisition amount to fund the reserve that they have, the CCH reserve. And then in 2022, during budget deliberations, Finance Committee had directed, oh no, that's not right, in 2022. It was 2 years before that, 21.
422, yeah.
to reduce that levy amount to match the requisition amount. And so we are proposing that that increase to that requisition be funded this first year from that Vital Homes Reserve so that we can limit the impact on property tax. That reserve is currently in a healthy state, and the intention of it had always been to help fund projects and operations. And then we'll need to revisit that in terms of the levy amount in next year's taxes. So we're recommending using that reserve this year to help limit the impact to tax. I'll pause there again if there are any questions on any of those items.
I don't see any.
Okay. Change my slide. There are a few amendments to the budget that we wanted to draw your attention to that again have no tax impact, but will have some impact on reserves. And we are seeing, despite the approved franchise fee increases, we are seeing a net $50,000 decrease to franchise fees based on the estimations that we've received from both ATCO and Fortis. So they're expecting that those revenues will decline. Based on policy, those revenues go directly to asset replacement and rehabilitation, and a portion also to the sustainability reserve. So the impact here is that our contribution to those reserves is reduced by that amount that we're seeing that decrease in revenue. Similarly, we are expecting to see continued decreases to the photo radar reserve. And here we're expecting that to decrease by $200,000. We have historically funded the equivalent of 1.5 RCMP officers from this reserve, and we anticipate by 2026, Rick, any end of 2025, that reserve to be depleted with the trend of where these reserves are going. And so that will be another area where we need to fund the equivalent of that 1.5 officers from taxes. We have been funding it from photo radar revenue. All right. We are expecting an increase, continued increase in paid parking revenue. So similar to the trend that we're seeing this year, we are anticipating that that will continue next year. And then we've just outlined there for you how we would propose splitting that revenue up. Our contract services fees are rising. Our bank services fees continue to go up. And then the rest of those items, we again plan to review with you in great detail as we circle back to the discussion on the paid parking revenue allocation model. With that philosophy again that we fund program costs first and then look at a distribution from there. The BIA has requested a slight increase to their budget, and that just is a straight flow through. So we collect and give, and it doesn't impact our taxes again either. So. Okay. We are proposing some amendments on the utility side as well, and again, we'll go into that in much more detail on Thursday. Mr. Comeau will be here and be able to walk you through impacts to the utility rate model, both for these operational items and also the impacts of our recent utility master plan. So we'll spend quite a bit of time reviewing that on Thursday. We are looking on the solid waste services side. Our hauling contract services costs have increased. We've got an additional or an increased transfer to the Bow Valley Regional Waste Management Commission for a bailer to help fund our portion of a bailer. And then also looking at a transfer to reserves, which is where we fund purchase of things like garbage trucks actually from. So, and that's what that piece is about. And then on the water and wastewater utility side, we really are looking at the long-term funding needs of the projects that are focused around asset rehabilitation and replacement that we've talked about with you in the utility master plan. We do have SEMA Plus joining us as well on Thursday, so they'll be able to answer questions for you if you have any around the technical kind of pieces of some of those projects once you see how they impact the capital plan.
Great, so those, that's coming on Thursday, and I can, from your report, I mean, the way that we deal with those increases is not through property taxes, but through proposed rate increases.
Correct. Yeah, the utilities are self-funding, and they're funded through utility rates, not through property taxes directly. Yeah, correct. Okay. This is you now, right? Is that me or you? No, that's you. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Biswas now for a few minutes so that you don't have to listen to me the whole time.
Change in voice. Okay. So just like to kind of touch on some budget best practices here. Wanted to remind everybody of the risk of funding ongoing operations from unpredictable or unstable source of revenues. It's not recommended as financial best practice. It's not fiscally prudent to rely on such source of revenues to build up a reserve to support some ongoing program. And as you can see, it's evident fairly soon in the operating plan that we need to work on this funding equivalent of a 1.5 RCMP officer from the photo radar reserve, which is no longer sustainable from 2025 onwards, as well as the CCH requisition, which is being recommended for the first year to be drawn from reserve, but will have tax implications in 25 and beyond. So just a bit of a flag there. Moving into the last two slides before we end the presentation, the master fee schedule. Council had approved the 2023-24 master fee schedule last year after we had undertaken an update on all fees. There was an inflation factor of 5% applied to almost all fees for 23, with the exception of planning and engineering fees, and another 5% for 2024. So this year, we have now brought the planning and engineering fees up, as well as you'll see some additions and increases to some of the fees, which are based on the cost recovery of the services that are provided by the town. All the changes to the fee schedule is highlighted in attachment number 5, which is on page 55 of your package today. Franchise fees increase. Again, this was approved by council last year. It was a phased-in increase for Fortis franchise fees from the current 12% to 16% in 2024, 18% in 2026, and reaching the maximum of 20% in 2028. And then for ATCO franchise fees, it was a raise from the current 30% to the maximum 35% in 2024. Increases to franchise fees will see contribution to the sustainability reserve and the asset replacement rehab reserve. So just wanted to end here saying this fee is a piece of the revenue that's designated to generate revenue from a different customer base. Even though there is many municipal taxpayers in the town, this fee also is exempt the bylaw fees where renters, schools, churches, everybody, oops, my hat keeps falling off, and the governments, they don't pay taxes, will be paying franchise fees. So it generates an income from exempt community members and kind of splits the burden of the town services equitably. So that was the thing. And next, over to human resources costs.
So on the human resources side, we have two items of new impact, and then one we just wanted to refresh or remind you of. As I've said a couple of times now, the current cost of living factor is 5.5% as opposed to the 2.6 that was approved in the 2024 budget last year. And the impact of that net impact is $550,000. as you know, and are well on top of, affordability continues to be a challenge in Canmore, and town employees face those same challenges. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Got my assistant here putting my mic on. Appreciate that. Administration is recommending that the COLA amount included in that budget be revised to reflect the impact of inflation this past year. As staff, like other residents, are facing higher costs for those basic goods and services. We have seen in this last year that attraction and retention continues to be a challenge, and vacant positions really result in direct impacts to the services we provide and offer to our residents and visitors. Just experiencing this firsthand this week as we're continue to try to recruit for a municipal clerk, and being able to find someone who can move here and find a place to live is proving to be very difficult. And as you know, it's a critical position for us to continue our operations, for you to be able to continue to have council meetings and to fulfill your legislative obligations. We really are seeing those impacts, and I'm feeling it firsthand this week. So that is the net of that. As I mentioned, benefit costs, about $40,000 we're anticipating there. And then we did have 3 positions that were approved last year for this year's budget. We had a facility supervisor, facilities project manager, which is an existing position. We had funded that from capital project, the business transformation capital project, as that person is focused in 2023 on really advancing work for our project management office, and will then shift into being funded from taxes and operating as a facilities project manager in 2024. And then a fleet coordinator position to manage our ever-growing fleet. That position is funded 80% from taxes and 20% from the solid waste utility, as a number of our vehicles obviously are garbage trucks, and that's part of that fleet that position will manage. So as a summary, on the top line, you'll see what was in the budget that you had approved last year. So we were looking at a 5.5% tax increase for 2024, 5.6 in 2025, and 3.1 in 2026. Did I say that wrong? I don't know. And then with what I've reviewed for you today, those numbers revise 7.8 in 2024, and then you'll see the impacts of those expenses that really raise the base budget result in a move to 6.7 in 2025 and 3.3 in 2026. So that's just the impact of those, today's cost of delivering those status quo items. And that's the review of the operating budget. So again, pause there for questions. We'll then turn it over to Mr. Mackay, who will walk you through a couple of those option items that we have. And we've got lots of time today to circle back to questions, so don't think this is your only opportunity.
You know, I had a question. This is going back to Biswa's presentation around slide around best practices. With regards to transit funded from paid parking, so how would you propose that go? These things are tied, they fit together. It's obviously a source of revenue. Is it just a matter of putting it into a different line item and say we're taxing for whatever we don't? We're putting all of the paid parking in a reserve, and then we basically each year allocate some from the reserve, or I just see them so intrinsically tied that I just wonder if it's a little bit of an exception to the rule.
I would say a little, but again, we're trying to be fiscally prudent and anticipate what might happen in the future. And so I think we're recommending with this increase that we would suggest this year that kind of cap out where we're at in terms of funding transit from parking revenue exclusively. It is a bit of this, the infamous fungibility conversation, though, as well, really. Like, if we consider paid parking revenue as revenue, it reduces the amount we need to collect on taxes, or we can dedicate it in this way, which also reduces the amount we need to collect on taxes. And so this, linking it in this way, I think has provided council with the opportunity to really make that connection clearly. But there is kind of a limit as to what we would say to fund the full transit program. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. Thank you. I think what we're trying to do, what we're recognizing, if you look at what's happened with photo radar, for example, or even the CCH requisition and levy, sometimes we can't anticipate, unexpected things happen. And so when you have a steady, what seems like a steady source of revenue from photo radar, you can't imagine the circumstance that will change where suddenly that goes away, but it does. And with CCH for years, the requisition was at $700,000, and then in a tough budget year, you know, there was enough in the reserve, and now we're back there and needing to retax for it. So, and that always creates all kinds of other downstream challenges. So I think we're trying to find a sweet spot. I don't think we're necessarily uncomfortable with the current transit and what we're suggesting, but it is easy when paid parking is exceeding revenues. It's still a very new program. You know, if another global pandemic or some other thing that we can't anticipate can really change that. And so we're just trying to be prudent and a little cautious in terms of how much we do that, so that we aren't in a position where suddenly we need to increase taxes or deplete the, what's the reserve, the rainy day reserve? Sorry, it's, thank you, tax stabilization reserve. We're just trying to point it out to be prudent. So I don't think the intention of that slide, although correct me if I was wrong, was to say we shouldn't fund any transit from paid parking, but that we need to do that in a restrained manner.
Right. Okay, so I know we're going to have a bigger discussion about this another day, but I just think, I just want to note that in my mind the issue is alive. Because just like we use revenues from Elevation Place to offset the expenses of staff and whatnot, and just like we use fine revenues and whatnot towards general revenues, this is another one. I think it's apples and oranges comparing to to the photo radar, and it is a little bit of the fungibility factor. So, you know, just from the optics point of view, I think that there's a nice connection, and so I just want to continue to speak to that. And I wasn't questioning at all the one-time use of reserves for the CCH. I think we recognize through the Livability Task Force there may be some recommendations that create other funding going forward that could possibly cover this in future years, and if not, then we need to examine the question, but it's a good one-year bridge, you know, so I just wanted to, not that we need to dive into it now, but I just want to keep that issue alive for when we do discuss it. Do you want to add something, Councillor McDowell?
Yeah, I did, and I think I'm sort of in a similar thread of thinking as yourself. But I guess I wonder if, you know, if there was something that would decimate transit, I believe much like what happened in the pandemic, it wasn't a lack of financing that had the Transit Commission reduce its services as the beginning of the pandemic. It was a lack of ridership. So one kind of fed the other. I think that at minimum we should maybe consider, like, I understand administration is, and I understand all of these, like you know, the photo radar one in terms of the RCMP officer, we tried to swap that out a few years ago and that didn't work. But I'm wondering if continued support, continued financial success within paid parking could be sort of the barometer or the lever that will continue to fund success within transit. Because I think that we are part of a larger organization in terms of the Transit Commission itself, and we at some point are going to have to, because our service isn't as mature as our partner service, we're going to have to level up, and that's sometimes going to mean perhaps putting money out when it's not necessarily just good for us, but what's good for everybody. And you're seeing some of that this year. But I do see that we have 3 positions that were approved for 2024, and I was under the impression that we had no positions fund for 2024, so that's good to know. Anyways, that's all I had to say. I don't know if that makes sense as to what I'm saying, but.
Sure, and I think that's good.
Like, success of one is going to feed success of the other.
Yeah, and I think
to a certain
that's a good string to when we're talking about PRAM. Let's not lose that thought as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point?
If I would add a comment there
Oh, yeah,
again,
yeah.
just, it is a bit of that fungibility factor. I mean, our current transit program and our current paid parking program have costs associated with them. And those costs include ongoing operating expenses. They include costs of equipment and infrastructure to be able to continue to grow both of those programs. And with all of that comes the need to repair and maintain that existing infrastructure. And so that, again, is part of where we're suggesting that some of this revenue can go to offset that. If we don't use paid parking revenue to offset that, we'll have to tax for that moving. So it's, again, that conversation, we pay for it one way or we pay for it another way. And that's really what's up for you to decide with the paid parking revenue allocation model, is what is the best way to distribute the revenue that we collect there.
Agreed.
I was just reflecting upon what the definition of non-recurring revenue would be, because, and the mayor mentioned it, there are things like fines and permits, even franchise fees, kind of almost fall along a similar continuum, I'm thinking in my head. With photo radar, it's non-recurring in the sense that, like, I can see that as the definition, but with paid parking, it's harder for me because we've put a price on parking regardless of who comes. But with photo radar, someone has to make a choice to speed. They can always make a different choice. And so it's kind of the non-recurring part. Anyways, now I'm getting into my rabbit hole of my brain. But I think with the paid parking, for me, it's more that if you want to come and park downtown, you have to pay. There's not really an option. So in terms of non-recurring, it's harder for me. It's kind of slightly away from where I'd see photo radar on that definition. But I also hear the caution around unexpected circumstances in the future that we can't anticipate that fundamentally change how we do business, like the pandemic did. And it's really good to be risk aware around that. But that type of situation decimated every revenue source we had. And I don't know how to avoid that in the future, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're great points. And I guess maybe a bit of, can say non-recurring or non-guaranteed, or like there's this element of unpredictability about some of these kinds of things, and that's what makes the risk exist. So again, with the choice of speeding related to photo radar, others can make a choice of parking. I'm not going to pay parking, I'm going to park somewhere else. It is a bit different, I totally agree, but it is that sense of potential unpredictability about what can happen there. That just makes us be a bit more conservative or a bit more cautious. Yeah.
What caused the net decrease in franchise fees?
Okay. So it's ATCO's revised its rates and forecasts, and it is a $170,000 decrease, whereas Fortis has given us an increase of 120. So it's a net, yeah.
Okay, so that's just kind of, it wasn't usership or anything like that, it was more just the actual fee structure?
Just the actual
Okay,
structure,
great.
yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on D4 before we move to D5? Okay, seeing none, let's move to D5, which is the budget amendment option with respect to Community Evaluator and Safe Park Program. Mr. Mackay.
Thank you. So if you think back to approximately a year ago, Council included both the Community Evaluator position and Safe Park Program in the 2023 budget, but currently these two, I guess the position and the program don't exist in the 2024 budget. So it's an option for consideration if that's something you'd like to see included and delivered moving forward. As a bit of background and history, the Community Evaluator and Safe Park position was initially thought of in 2019 when it was observed that there were a growth in the number of individuals living in their vehicles in the community. So a seasonal outreach worker was hired at that time to look further into this trend. And then the Safe Park program was created and intended to be delivered. The pandemic delayed that, and there was a part-time position allocated in 2020 to support that. It was reallocated to support pandemic response initiatives, and then eventually in 2021, that part-time position did start the Safe Park program. And also, with any spare time, continued to support housing initiatives and assessment work, so on a limited basis. In 2022 and 2023, this position was full-time, and this allowed us to receive both the Safe Park program, as well as additional community assessments, support of the Affordable Services Program, work on various grants and grant opportunities. So in 2022, and then in 2023, this full-time position continued with all of the previously mentioned items delivered, as well as they took over the maintenance of the Canmore Community Monitoring Report. So there was some savings in contracted services there, not enough to completely offset the full wage of the position, but some savings. So that's a bit of the history. As I mentioned, during the 23-24 budget process, Council approved the running of the Safe Park program for an additional year. It's not included in the 2024 budget. If it's desired to see this program continue into the foreseeable future, there's two potential resourcing scenarios that we've identified. So the first scenario, option one, would be to continue, I would say, status quo. And status quo, when I say that, what I mean is what we had in 2022 and 2023. So not status quo from previous, where we had a part-time position allocated. The community evaluator work in this full-time position would be comprised of certainly managing the Safe Park program, the CCMR, Canmore Community Monitoring Report. So instead of contracting that service out, we would do that work in-house. They've also taken on the reporting of and organizing the reporting around Council's strategic plans, objectives, and key results. And they've also completed some community assessment and monitoring work. So if you recall the child care assessment, assessments on homelessness, the living wage indicator, that's all work completed by this position. And with a full-time allocation, it could be the type of work that continues. They've also worked to support the exploration of grant opportunities. The second option would be to allocate a part-time position. which really would be dedicated to the delivery of the Safe Park program. So potentially this position would be seasonal, and may have different individuals hired to deliver that program annually. And really that's what the community receives for that is the Safe Park program, with the potential to support other housing-related initiatives as resources allow. So what I want to highlight here is that CSD would not, community social development would not be resourced under this scenario to do more detailed reporting on the council strat plan and related outcomes. Community assessments that have been provided to council or the committee of the whole in the past likely wouldn't be possible or would only be delivered as workload permits. Less in the way of grant writing, and instead of making quarterly updates to the CCMR, we'd have annual updates that would be performed by a contractor, is what that scenario looks like. Of course, the option 3 is to end the Safe Park pilot and the community evaluator position. So this wouldn't have any impact on the 2024 budget as approved. We could anticipate some level of increase in municipal enforcement's interaction with illegal campers. Businesses may experience increased challenges recruiting and retaining seasonal staff. And then community social development also won't have the capacity to perform the community assessments that I've spoken about and some more of the detailed reporting related to progress on council's strategic plan. So to quantify the financial impact of options 1 and option 2, I have it on the screen here. It's also in your packages there. The net expense anticipated with option 1, the full-time community evaluator, represents $68,000, which is equivalent to approximately a 0.21% tax increase. You'll note that the CCMR, the contracted services associated with that work, would be taken out of the 2024 budget, so providing a notable offset. Also, the revenue associated with Safe Park is projected based on this year's actuals and the level of participation that we saw. So a few things that go into that. Option 2, the community evaluator in a part-time capacity would result in a net expense of $48,000 or a tax impact of 0.15%. With that, I'll take any questions that the Finance Committee might have related to the community evaluator in Safe Park.
Councilor Hillstead?
With the back to the numbers there, with the 6,000 program fee, is that with the last year's formula for participation, or is that, because at the COW presentation they did say that there's a chance to potentially increase those slightly, which could help with offsetting, because like if you do from the committee of the whole meeting, you add up the expenses and the revenues just strictly from actually running the supplies and everything for the Safe Park, not including the salary fee, it almost covers itself, but returning the deposits makes it slightly negative. So does this take into account what we did last year, or is there, option to, because I think fees could be potentially raised slightly, and then maybe we can get to cost recovery of making that surely just a staff time number and not an actual extra cost. Just again, wouldn't be a huge savings, but it would be basically make the program run itself, self-sustaining, and then the total real cost is just the admin side of it.
Yes, absolutely. We need to make a few changes to the program to do that, but I think if that's something that if that's an important piece for the finance committee, it could be helpful for us to get that as a bit of direction, and then we would do some work to make modifications either to the fees or the way the program operates to achieve that, or to seek to achieve it. It is a program that we've seen relatively low participation in, and then a significant increase in this past year.
And balancing act of, not raising it and all of a sudden we go back to previous years. So I was just more curious, like with the numbers that are presented here, is that more going off of last year's numbers?
It is, but what I would highlight is the supplies and services line. We came in 2023 under budget, by percentage-wise a fair bit compared to what was anticipated. We have seen costs increasing, both contracted services and otherwise. So I guess there's a little bit of uncertainty there, as well as if things get broken or whatnot. It is also a fairly new program, especially with that level of participation. But like I say, if
there's some play,
but if that's a strong desire to see user fees offset supplies and services, that could be something we take away to attempt to achieve.
And again, I think it's going to be that balancing act of finding the right thing. But even with all this talk, inflation's not going away right away, so we probably need to just look at that anyways, because the program's going to continue to cost more, and if we're just keeping fees at one, like, things need to move around a bit. But that was my main, just because we talked about that committee of whole. So I was just curious if this setup here, because again, it's not going to change that number all that much. It's just, but since we're on the topic, I just want to bring it up.
Absolutely.
Councillor Graham?
Mr. McKay, maybe you could speak to how, if the program didn't exist, how would we manage the folks camping around? What would that look like? Sorry, am I close enough to this mic? Is that we can
Eat the mic.
eat the mic? You can hear me. I don't know if anybody else can.
Sure. I mean, currently, municipal enforcement during the warmer months conducts daily patrols of the community and interacts with individuals who are sleeping in vehicles or camping within municipal boundaries. So I would expect that would continue. I would anticipate that the number of interactions that they have with individuals who are either camping or sleeping in vehicles could increase. To what extent, I'm not sure. And then as municipal enforcement does, there's also complaint-based enforcement that occurs. So if somebody observes, I guess, a violation to a bylaw and brings that to municipal enforcement's attention, they seek to follow up.
I think essentially the enforcement would continue. What would happen is a removal of summer housing options. That's what the difference would be. So instead of 60 people who had you can say what you want about whether or not living in a van in a parking lot constitutes housing, but it was a sanctioned, safe place for people to live and work in the community, we'd be removing those spots. So the enforcement would continue and there would be less housing. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So we would enforce at the current places that we are allowing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Harm reduction.
Thank you very much.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. And I've asked this question before. Have we had any, actually, let me rewind. I think what stood out to me from the presentation that we had a couple weeks ago with regards to the Safe Park program was really, although there's a sanctioned, safe place for people to sleep every night, there's no ability to settle, even just for a night or a day for 24 hours. And so my question is, has there been any discussions at all with Wapiti about the ability to have maybe an expanded, and I know that council hasn't directed you this, but I'm just wondering in terms of your organic conversations with people we contract to, having the ability to have certain spaces where people maybe have a place to settle for like a week. So currently most campgrounds, you're allowed to stay for 2 weeks and then you gotta hustle on, even if it's for a night, right? And I think it's just so that people don't literally set up camp for long periods of time. Would there be any ability for us to have conversations with Wapiti about doing something similar? And that would not house all of our 60 people that we housed this past summer, or we didn't house, provide place for this past summer, but it might for some of them. And I can imagine that that has got to be very unsettling, having to literally pack up, move every single morning, and then come back later. And so I'm just wondering if there's another sort of slight, like almost a 2.0.
No, just to make sure I fully understand
Yeah.
what you're looking at there is rather than operating the Safe Park as it is currently, to operate it in partnership with Wapiti for
Well,
in
yeah,
an
and some of it
ongoing.
would exist exactly the way it does now, and the way that you're proposing and did last summer. But then there might be some, maybe returning people that we've had that might have the opportunity, and that may or may not be a problem. I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
If you want to jump in, I think we had tried something like that in the past, and there were challenges associated with that operating model.
When was this? Sorry?
Last summer.
Oh, okay. All right.
We've had multiple conversations with Wapiti about that, and it doesn't work for them for their operating model. A Safe Park participant can go and camp at Wapiti, but they need to pay the Wapiti rates.
Fee, yeah. Gotcha.
I was just going to add to that we do have a contract with the operators of the campground, obviously, so it's certainly, we could have that discussion with them again going into the new contract, but I don't know that there'd be a high likelihood of success. It doesn't prevent us from having the conversation, though, when their contract is up.
Yeah, that would be, I think, prudent, and, you know, maybe that means we ask for less money, like, when I get it, but, and then maybe, perhaps the per night fee that we're paying, that is being paid, you know, I believe it was $10 originally per evening, and now it's $5, maybe that $10 might be more worth it, or the $15 might be more worth it, if a person can actually set up and walk away for the day and come back and not have to necessarily pack up every morning.
So if council approves this, you could also give us direction to have the conversation with Wapiti.
Yeah.
We don't get any revenue from Wapiti. It's similar to how the mountain market is run. There's a contractor that we have an agreement with, and they manage it, but all of the revenue is theirs. It's the same with the mountain market. There's no financial exchange. It's just a contract for service. So we don't get revenue from Wapiti.
I don't understand that, but I'll talk to you about that later.
Any other questions with respect to D5? Councilor Graham?
Can you just remind me, I can go back and watch that presentation, but that we were almost maxed out at the number of people we could take through that program, correct?
Yes, and additional, I would say night to night, there may be some additional space, but community social development considered it to be operating essentially at capacity with maybe like mild increases, but not the kind of thing where it'd be a notable program expansion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that's D5 then. So moving on to D6, 2024 operating budget amendment options accessible vehicle funding request, Origin at Spring Creek.
Thank you. So another community social development related item, really. And rather than have a request like this come to council in a different form, we felt it prudent to funnel it to the Finance Committee, given that we're talking about budget amendments for 2024. So in your agenda package, there's an administrative briefing on this matter, as well as a copy of Origin's funding request that summarizes it. So the background really is that it's been identified that there's a lack of accessible transportation available in Canmore. When I say accessible, I really mean for individuals who require the use of a wheelchair. Sometimes, in some circumstances, EMS is utilized to transport patients to medical appointments, potentially into Calgary or elsewhere, taking that resource out of service and out of the community. Some individuals would say, well, what about the Community Social Development's volunteer driver program? And this is a great program for those needing transportation and a little bit of extra assistance, but doesn't address the type of need, it doesn't meet the needs of someone who uses a wheelchair or requires significant assistance getting in or out of a vehicle. For additional context, the population of seniors in the community is expected to increase in the coming years. Not that it's only seniors who would benefit from additional accessible transportation, but oftentimes that's a demographic that does benefit from such a service. Origin at Spring Creek currently operates an accessible bus as well as a van for its residents, but that's not used to serve the rest of the community. So that gap still exists. As you can see in Origin's proposal, they're requesting support to purchase a van with a wheelchair lift, valued at approximately $35,000. The request that we've received is for $25,000, as they're anticipating to receive a $10,000 grant to support the purchase of this vehicle. If the municipality was to fund or assist with the capital costs associated with this van, it would allow Origins to offer this service, so wheelchair transportation, to the broader community on a cost recovery basis. So what they've indicated is they're not looking to have a significant margin or a margin on offering this service, but that it is delivered to both residents of Origins at Spring Creek, but also open to other members of the community. If council were to grant Origin's request, administration would enter into an agreement that really details parameters with the provision of that service. So ensuring that there's access and service availability for eligible Canmore residents who don't reside at Origin. Ensure a cost recovery model and service fees are agreed to and in place. And then also outline ongoing reporting requirements to check in on the program and its effectiveness for the broader community. As far as funding sources, potential funding sources are concerned for this initiative, the town received the Government of Alberta's Low Income Transit Pass Program grant, which in 2023 we've now received $711,000 so far, and we're anticipating another $110,000. Sorry, I'm missing a zero on that PowerPoint slide. In Q1 of 2024. So for a total of just over $800,000. The use of these funds for this purpose would require approval from the Government of Alberta, but they fit the spirit and intent of the grant when we look at this program. And as Ms. Biswa alluded to, a one-time funding source associated with a one-time expense, aligns with some of the budget best practices. If Government of Alberta approval wasn't received, an alternate funding source would be identified in the form of an operating reserve or other such place that I'd look to our finance department to recommend. And with that, I anticipate there may be some questions.
So I have a question around, first of all, who would own the vehicle then?
It would be Origins.
Okay. And so I imagine that there'd be something in the agreement and maybe a lien at the personal property registry that should the program not proceed past a certain length of time, that the asset would be returned to the town of Canmore, something to that effect?
Yeah, the asset or equivalent value, I could see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCallum and Councillor Faubert.
So is it a new vehicle or used? Because 38,000 is pretty cheap for a wheelchair accessible van.
Believe it's used.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And so my question is have we already worked out, my assumption is that Origin residents would not be given priority, but that the community overall would be given priority, correct? Because I know that this is also part of their like Origin on the go, where they're expanding their facilities to the greater community to use their facilities and recreation at a cost. And I guess I just would want to make sure that this would be quite separate from that program.
That it would be separate from the Origin on the Go program specifically, or?
Yeah, I don't think I would, I understand that there's a cost associated with being transported. I guess I would want to make sure that there wasn't a priority to Origin residents or Spring Creek residents primarily, and that, yeah, there would be some sort of, if this program ceases, that we need to have some conversations, but yes, I don't think I'm keen on the, like, obviously you have to pay to get a ride, but to pay to play, or, do you understand the spirit of what I'm saying? No, okay. So I guess I'll leave it at this. I do not want Origin residents to have priority over the general public to use the van. Just because they happen to live there and they're paying top dollar for their accommodation.
So the way, just to note, as far as process goes, all of these are options that are presented. So they're actually not going to be actioned unless there's a motion of a member of Finance Committee that is passed.
Gotcha.
So we will have a debate around that. So it's really good to ask the questions. Just on that note, while I'm already on this little tangent, everybody should be thinking in terms of if there are motions that they'd like to bring, whether it's supporting one of these options or something else. As Sally had identified earlier, it's first of all great to ask the questions first, to sort of lay the foundation for that, and it's best to ask those questions in the public forum so we all receive the answers. But if there is some information that you're hoping will come at a future meeting, it's very good to flag that for administration. We will take the time at the end here before we adjourn to see if there's anything that anybody would like to flag right now. Is that fair? Okay. So we can continue, if somebody's wanting to move this forward, we can certainly have the debate and perhaps put some parameters on the approval if it is approved. Did you have anything else?
No, that was all, sorry.
Cool. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Mackay. The cost recovery for the service, would that be charged to the person taking the transportation, or would it be charged to the town of Canmore FCSS or whoever ran the volunteer driver program?
This would be certainly separate from the volunteer driver program. My reason for flagging that is I think people can sometimes think if you need a bit of extra assistance, that's the program that's offered. And I highlight that to say that program doesn't serve the type of individual that this program would benefit. As far as the exchange of funds would go, it would be between Origin and the individual receiving the service, so not through the town of Canmore.
So then the volunteer driver program would continue?
Correct.
Because that's a different service level and need. Are we aware of whether or not the people who in our community could potentially use this Origin bus have the ability to pay?
You know, I would suggest it's quite variable. I suspect that there's many individuals who do, and I suspect there's individuals who would be challenged even with a service fee based on cost recovery.
Because, yeah, that's, for me, if we are going to use public money to fund a capital purchase for another organization and in exchange for a public benefit, I want to ensure that I understand that that public benefit exists. And that is my thought of the moment. And the other thought I had
So
is...
just before you leave that thought, so I think there is something there, if there's any information that could be brought back or made available to Finance Committee that could perhaps demonstrate that there might be a public benefit, because I am concerned about the ability to pay as well. So, yeah, so anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't lost.
Yeah, because like, what if nobody uses it?
Yeah.
Right, although I do believe there is a need, I just kind of want to, I think that we're at the very beginning, and my sense is from now being the third person to ask some questions is that we definitely want to understand this a little better. The other area I'd want to understand is what would happen if Origin isn't able to make its commitments, i.e. they don't have enough drivers, so they're not driving anyways.
Sure, okay. So I guess a bit more detail and perhaps an expansion on some of the agreement terms might be helpful for the Finance Committee to help ensure the community benefit, as well as what would happen if.
Or even a suggestion as to the approach that would be taken, so that if that agreement is not reached, then, I mean, let's say there was approval, it would be subject to certain terms being achieved.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering how far along the agreement road we are, because if those conversations haven't happened yet, and probably they shouldn't, because we wanted to bring it first to council to see if there was interest, is that more if council's interested, what would happen at the Finance Committee is the giving of direction with parameters and questions answered that we could then report back on, or I guess I'm wondering if you have an ability to report back on this level of detail in this Finance Committee window.
I can make an attempt to do so. Origin has been pretty responsive to some back and forth, and they've seen the broad strokes agreement terms, but we haven't gone down to the level of detail which we're talking about.
Yeah, I think like the devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details that need to be fleshed out here a little bit further. So I think the mayor's question on who would own the vehicle, it sounds like Origins would like to own the vehicle, so I'm assuming that so this vehicle would not be a town of Canmore fleet responsibility.
Correct.
Okay. Which could be good or bad. I think when we do a pretty good job taking care of our vehicles, and so what happens if this vehicle has an issue? Are they coming back for us for more money to help fix this thing? Because we've already sunk 25 into it. Other parts, as Councillor Faubert mentioned, the cost recovery model, I'm really curious about that. Do Origin clients also pay the cost recovery model, or is the cost recovery segment kind of borne more on people outside of Origin? This is kind of tied into like the Origin package. This is a feature set you get. We're going to cost recover off of everyone else that's public.
So I'm unsure if there's an additional fee for transport that Origin charges residents.
Okay.
I suspect it's part of a package, that there's a certain amount of transportation that's provided.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and then those also, what does this vehicle look like, right? Does it have like a town of Canmore thing, partially funded by Canmore? Does it look like all intents and purposes an Origins vehicle? I think there's optics to that need to be explored.
Councilor Mayor?
Actually,
oh, you just turned your mic off.
It was on for a while there. All of my questions were just asked. And it was more about the repairs and maintenance in the future, which you would have to do through your discussions with Origin. And if there was a cost recovery from their residents and not just the cost recovery from the community.
Lots of questions? Okay. Anything else on this topic? Okay. With respect to, before we adjourn, as noted, I'm just trying to think if we need motions. I think for some things we might, just so that there's not work being done if it's only one person and nobody really supports it. But then there might be some things that are just generally agreed upon. So maybe we'll do it on a case-by-case basis. There is something that I'm interested in, and I think it should be by motion, just so that there is, in fact, finance committee support for it, because I think it would take a little bit of work. So the thing I want to raise is it's being proposed that we have a 2.3% increase to what the current approved budget is. And I'm completely understand all of the why, as to why there's an increase, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it. In fact, a lot of it is just respecting the circumstances that have happened. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't also understand, if we stuck at the 5.5, what does a reduction in the proposed budget or proposed amendments that would equal 2.3% mean? What would it mean? Just so that we can make a fully informed decision that we are, like, if we were to support a 7.8, subject to any other changes, we know that it's because of this, but we also know that if we stuck to the 5.5, this is what it would entail. And so my motion would be to direct administration to come back with elements of cuts that would amount to 2.3%, so that the recommended budget would still be at a 5.5% increase. I think that would be helpful information for me. It would be helpful information for the public to know what that would mean. I mean, if it means a significant reduction in services, which I expect it would be, then it's good to know what that pain would feel like, or what that pain would be expected, and then we can make the decision whether we continue down that route at all, or whether we go with the proposed budget. So once again, my motion is to direct administration to return to the Finance Committee with elements or options for cuts that amount to 2.3%. And I'm interested to know if there's others that share that and would support that motion, or if that work is not required, because I recognize it will take some work. Councillor McCallum, then Councillor Faubert, then Councillor Moe.
So it occurred to me, and I think that's a good exercise, Your Worship, that every time, well, not every time, when we've asked administration to go back and do this work, generally it means cuts to our contributions to reserves. And I'm in support of your motion, but I would like to see, my amendment to that would be that do not include cuts to planned reserve contributions.
I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
So that do not include cuts to reserves contributions.
Because that is an easy place to find money, and that's,
Down the road.
that, then we just keep kicking that can down the road, as opposed to having the hard conversations that we need to have as a community. If we want these things, we need to pay for them and not expect future generations to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. And as I said, take that as a friendly amendment. I obviously would not expect that this information would come back necessarily for the 2nd to the 9th, but would be before the 14th. Yeah.
I don't know if I can speak. I'm sorry, I forget if it's a different rule at Finance Committee, but.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question with the motion to administration. Do you have some concerns?
I don't have any concerns, thank you. I will just, to massage Councillor McCallum's amendment, I don't believe administration would make any further. We've already suggested, you've already approved several reductions to reserve. We will be bringing back, just so you're aware of what this will look like, service level reductions.
Perfect.
The only way for us to achieve 2.3% will be to reduce services.
Okay, so we'll stay with the amended motion, just so that there's clarity. It's
Yeah,
good to know.
the clarity's great.
Good to know that there is alignment there. Councillor Faubert.
So does the 2024 budget include contributions to reserve as per what our policies and administration would recommend, or they were cut last year?
They were cut last year.
Okay, perfect. I am in support of the motion and the amendment. I think that's a really good point that Councillor McCallum brought, because it's really easy to go at that savings number that we put into reserves. I think that the bonus, this is an exercise in trying to understand service delivery and what happens when we have to make choices to remove services in order to meet budget. And I think that that's an excellent process to go through for it was a 2.2?
2.3%.
2.3%. I think it will be challenging, because I cannot, for the life of me, imagine any service that we provide that's not essential or needed or valued in our community. And then I will say as well that at the two numbers, what we had approved last year and then the increase proposed of 2.3, I think we're still well within inflation and population growth. So I think that definitely going a benefit for the community to understand what it means to bring our budgets in on some of these numbers. A benefit for the community to understand what it means to bring our budgets in on some of these numbers. A benefit for the community to understand what it means to
Okay, so there was little feedback, just in case it didn't communicate clearly to those who might be watching, we received a sudden feedback in here, and Councillor Faubert could hear her voice booming through the room, and Councillor Faubert, the imposter, started to mouth the words. Okay, so thank you for that, Councillor Faubert, and just so everybody's understanding, 2.3% is roughly $740,000. It's $736,000, I believe. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, as Mayor Crosser just noted, like every 1% works out to about $320K. So 2.3 gets to that 740 number. I think it's an interesting exercise. I think it also kind of gives us that gradient as well too. So here's 5.5, here's 7.8. We maybe work in the middle room, seeing what's being cut to get there. A question for administration: would you guys, in this exercise, also explore revenue sources as well to offset some of this as well too? So, for example, if there's like service fees, would they change?
We've already done that. That's already included in your budget.
Mm-hmm.
So any, we believe, reasonable increase to
Okay, so
revenue
those
has
are-
already
all
been
right.
done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's already included. This will be, to get to 5.5 will be reductions only.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
And
Okay.
just for clarity, I would be, why I said elements or options within that is because it may outline something that somebody may want to pursue. It's not the whole 2.3, but,
Yeah.
0.8 of it is this, or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
it becomes more granular. You can
Yeah.
explore it. Okay, I could support your motion, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Mara?
Thank you. I've just been thinking about the amendment and your motion. I support your motion. If there was, I'm not sure about the reserve. I thought if there would be one reserve, one that we could decrease, I don't know if it would be the 2.3 or any amount that would, we could wiggle in there a little bit of wiggle room. Would there be one specific or no?
We've already cut all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
we did cut, yeah.
So
no.
just clarity on that. First of all,
This is-
administration already indicated that they wouldn't be suggesting anything
Yeah.
there because it's already done. The other thing is it's always open to a member of the Finance Committee to bring forward a motion if they would like to suggest that, but it wouldn't be part of this 2.3, that's the information that's coming back to us. But that doesn't mean that if there's a reserve that you wanted to ask some questions about, that you couldn't explore that as well, and somebody could potentially bring that back.
Thank you for the clarity.
Yep, okay. Right, Ms. Rogers?
I would just add there, we are not recommending that. We are living the nightmare, I would say, of trying to make up for reserve contribution cuts we have made over the last decade. And our gap is continuing to grow by hundreds of thousands of dollars every time we don't make a contribution. Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why we would not recommend that. We're trying any way we can to find ways to fund that. It's one of the reasons why we're recommending what we are with the paid parking revenue allocation model, is to try to fill that gap a little bit. So yeah, we would not recommend that.
And before we bring these reductions back, we will be reviewing all of those reserves and the capital project and the PRAM on the 2nd and the 9th. So you'll also get a sense of where we're at and what that gap is before we have this conversation.
Great, thank you. And thanks for that clarity. Any other members of the Finance Committee that wish to speak to the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, is anybody else wishing to express interest in information that would help in deliberations going forward? This won't be the only opportunity, but it is this opportunity. Councillor Faubert.
Not information, but I know that I'd be willing to make the motion of including the community evaluator position. And I don't know if this is the right time for that.
It is.
And then the other one is I would be prepared to make a motion to direct administration to return in the 2025, or no, 2024 budget process with options to no longer use the photo radar reserve to fund the RCMP officer positions. So not a this year change, but a next year change. And when I say options, I would mean both cutting those positions from the budget or finding a different funding source, if that makes sense.
So with both of those, I believe that we will not likely receive any further information or presentations respecting them, and so I think it would be okay to make those motions now. Ultimately, anybody that wishes to bring motions around the budget, the deliberations day will be the day. Make sure you bring them by then, and have asked any information you need prior to then, because obviously we're going to have some more information that may impact like decisions around the 2.3%. But that being said, I don't have any concerns with hearing either of those motions now, because I think that we've received the information on those. And I would just seek clarity with the CAO. Am I correct on that? That future presentations will not likely touch on the community evaluator position or photo radar in the future?
Correct. This today is our entire operating budget presentation. We have nothing else planned. It would just be responding to any direction from you. So we would welcome both of those motions today. That'd be great.
Right, so if you
Sarah,
want to,
just in that, what's up there, I sent you two in the budget. So the community evaluator in the budget can come out.
and is it the full,
Yeah.
Councillor Faubert, is it the full-time one that you wanted to put forward?
Yes.
Okay. And so That's the $68,000, the 0.21% increase. Would you like to speak to that motion?
I'm not sure where the future of the Safe Park program is going, given just how tenuous housing is, not just in our community, but across the country. But I believe that in 2023, we provided safety in a way that I think is worth providing for people who struggle to find a home in our community. And I think that continuing this program is worthwhile. I see really great value in the fact that the community evaluator position not only managed the Safe Park program, but also did the community monitoring report, as well as other really important reporting and information gathering and detailing processes like our strategic plan. There's a cost offset in terms of the community monitoring report that if this was a part-time position, we'd still have to contract out that work. And I think that there may be changes or different needs in terms of this type of support that we provide to workers in our community in the future. So having a full-time position to manage to help manage the program will give me the assurance, like the ability to know that in the future we'll continue to respond to this need. I'll leave it at that.
I'm sorry, I have a question of clarification. I just want to clarify, because we use full-time in a couple of different ways. Full-time in terms of not the part-time option that Mr. Mackay mentioned, but full-time also in terms of permanent, not another one-year extension. Yes. Okay, thank you.
So this would become part of the status quo budget instead of another 1 year.
Thank you for clarifying.
So maybe in the motion, we'd want to say full-time permanent community evaluator?
Does that work for you?
Good, thanks for
Okay.
that.
So let's add, yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you for that. Councillor Hillstead.
Yeah, it's about two parts, so I'll talk to the motion too, but just a question of clarification. If we approve this, should the previous motion then be bumped up to 2.5? Because if this gets approved, that increases the previous motion. So
Yeah,
again, like it's.
I'm happy to just leave the previous motion as it is, because basically, we're always taking a look at add-ons. So this would be an add-on that would bring it up to 8.01, and then there may be some elements that come back with the 2.3 that offset it or bring it down. So I'm happy.
Okay.
I'm happy to have that.
Yeah, I could just say ditto, so I will. That's
That's
basically covered. I know it's out of character for
That's
myself.
what Councillor Hillstead would say.
Yeah. But no, I agree on a lot of, like,
Yeah.
it's more than just the safe park. That's part of their role, but the other aspects are also very important, and I think we've gotten good value out of this position. If we don't have the safe park program, we just have other issues which will require different staffing. So it's basically one way or another. Essentially, we're going to be paying for the safe park program no matter what, just it'll look different. It's whereas this, I think, I think this is a good option for those people that choose that lifestyle or don't choose that lifestyle, and that's how they have to go. Because I've met many people that it is a lifestyle choice. You see lots of things nowadays where people they blog and they vlog all of their exploits of going across country. This is their lifestyle choice. But for some, it's not. So I think it is important that we keep the Safe Park program, and I think having the full-time community evaluator and the other things that they do is great. So I can support this motion.
Thank you. I have a question for administration. Do we know how much a 1% increase in taxes equates to for the average home on a either monthly or yearly basis?
It's hard to take him seriously.
Yeah. The answer is yes. So it would be an annual impact on that average household of $155.
So 155 for the whole 7.8? Yes. Okay,
The
so,
whole 7.8.
And
yeah.
12.92 per month.
okay, so that's, so 7.8 goes $159,
Just under $13 a month.
average home, 13, approximately 13 per month.
The 7.8% represents
55
A year.
for a year.
Median assessment of $970,000.
The median assessment is $970,000, so that's your average home. The median assessment is $970,000, so that's what, when we say average, that's what average means. So it's $155 a year on a $970,000 home.
For the full 7.8.
For 7.8%.
I'm sorry, 100 and,
55 a
100,
year, which is
55.
just under, it was 12 something, under $13 a
Okay.
month
right.
increase.
So every 1% increase is approximately 20 bucks.
Oh, yeah,
And,
okay.
and this is a 0.21, so this is a fifth of that, so it's about $4 a year per tax, per property. Something like that. Yeah, no, I'm just trying to, you know.
4 cents?
$46 a year, the incremental difference, so that 2.3 additional is $46 per year extra,
Right.
or just under $4 a month
Okay,
for that 2.3 lift.
for the 2 point,
The difference between 5 and 7.8.
okay.
I think he's asking a question about incorporating the community evaluator. What is
Oh.
the cost?
Yeah.
Is that correct, Mayor
Yeah.
Krauser?
Yeah.
You're,
like
you're
the
actually not
monthly
looking for
cost.
that, the 2.3%, you're looking at the 0.21%
All
increase.
of that's, all of it's been helpful.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think we've answered
We
one
can
question,
think
which
about
is what's the difference between 2.3 and 5.5, and that's about $4 a month. Are you also trying to understand the amount of the 0.21 increase? Yes?
Yep. And
You
that's-
understand?
that's-
So I think the
that's
question,
10%, That's
Mr.
10% of it, so it's about $4 a year.
$4 a year.
Okay,
It's okay.
All right.
We can, maybe, rather than doing this on the fly, it might be helpful for us to, we can bring that back to you
Yeah.
when we bring back the options.
thank you, it just would be
Yeah.
helpful. I got the answer, basically what I needed. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham?
I too will support this one. I originally had great reservations about this program because of its lack of utilization in the early days. And that was due to a lot of reasons. We don't see this style of housing going away. In fact, I think it will only increase over the next while. We just got a presentation from CIBC about the cost of housing being the most expensive since 1986. Is that right, roughly? Yeah. Mid-'80s. I am concerned about what happens if we don't do this program. Turning back to enforcement and just displacing people that we've seen are the average citizens of this town. They work in all of the jobs that we see every average day people work in. It is a relatively small increase. It is an increase in a year that we're looking for not too many increases. But this one, I did have hesitations around the full-time the permanent side of this thing, but I also don't really want to hash this one out year after year after year.
I'm good with it how it is. Thank you very much for bringing it forward.
Is there some clarification needed, or?
$4 per year is the impact of that
Yeah,
community
that's what
evaluator to the average
my
resident.
back of
Sorry,
the-
I just
my
didn't know
back
if
of
it
the
would help
envelope-
your
Back of the
discussion.
envelope ended up, it was $4 per year per tax roll. Yeah, thanks. Councillor Mara?
I too was having concerns with it being a forever position. I'm having a little bit of whatever in my brain here. It's not even the $4 a month.
Year.
I mean, oh, a year.
Year.
Okay, a year. I see that we will save in contracted services. My only concern is the recovery fee. I mean, there's so many people struggling in the community besides these people. And I just, I know it's only the $4 per year, so I was having a little there. So I'm thinking I'm supporting the motion at this moment, but I would like to see a little different or a little more focus on the fees and the refund policy. So that's where I am.
Okay, so consider that, it's not part of this motion, but if you want to have the Finance Committee make a recommendation to council in that regard, then you can bring a motion. It doesn't have to be today. You can think about it, and it could be brought during deliberations. Okay? I will speak in favor of the motion. In my mind, I just needed to get a sense of how much it was costing. $4 per tax roll per year to assist with the most vulnerable in our community, while also recognizing that if this assistance is not provided, it just puts that much further of a strain on attraction and retention of employees, since that's 60 people. So I'll support it. I think we've all spoken to it. All those in favor?
Can I get a chance to
No,
speak?
Councillor Modis, sorry. Yeah.
With regards to Karen Marr's thoughts on this, I would say ditto. And yeah, I do think that. Ditto. Ditto.
Okay, well done.
Thank you.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now to Councillor Faubert's second motion, which is on the screen, and is that accurate?
Yeah, so photo radar.
Tell me about it.
Tell me about it.
Tell me about it.
Photo radar.
You two are killing it.
What about it? Okay, so all jokes aside, I thought I would be the most disruptive in my costume, but thank you to Councillor Ma. Having seen on the last council, I know there was a motion before to disconnect the photo radar funding from the funding of these 1.5 RCMP officers, and continuing to hear administration on good financial practices and non-recurring revenue sources tied to recurring operational costs. I wanted to bring this forward, but not for this year per se, but so that the work can be done to prepare for next year's budget for options for us to move away from this connection between this funding and these positions. And I'm leaving it open because I think there are some different ways to approach this, not just from funding, but also from the point of view we could eliminate those positions as well. And so that's my motion.
Thank you for that. I'll support the motion. We've been encouraged, including today, to move away from funding recurring operational expenses with non-recurring, especially depleting funding. And so we're going to have to rip off this Band-Aid at some point. And given that it's already funded in 2024, 2025 would be the next opportunity. So thank you for bringing the motion. Would anybody else like to speak to it? Councillor Ma/Hillstead?
Well, Councillor Faubert, as my dad Greg told me the other day when we finished up a roof, son, you nailed it. I do feel we're in an interesting spot here where you see like the revenue being chipped away at by the province, 50% they're taking. Part of me wonders if the writing's on the wall for a photo radar even existing in its current capacity. Like I only see it starting to diminish more and more. So if we're starting to get caught out on paying RCMP positions with this variable source of funding, I think it's really prudent to take a closer look. Ditto.
Councillor Graham?
I'd like to thank Councillor Graham for bringing this one forward. I don't think it's any secret where I sit on this one, and moving away from this model it's about time. We need to. I'll echo Councillor Hillstead-Ma's comments about we don't know where this model will be, or this. So it's time to deal with this one. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I just say thank goodness we're carrying these unanimously, because trying to record who actually voted for what would be very difficult. There was opposition. Okay, so now the question remains, is there any other information that people know that they would like to have as part of the deliberations, and we can determine if a motion is required or not? Councillor Graham?
An increase in the fruit tree removal program would be a capital item. No.
Is it not capital item?
Well, it's in operating right now.
Okay.
In, I think Public Works admin, off the top of my head. Yeah.
Thank you. Then this would be an appropriate time to, thank you very much.
So it's in there at 10,000 right now, recurring?
I can't remember.
20,000? Anyway.
I thought it was 15, but Rick's on it, so.
I'll speak to it in the meantime. My understanding is that it's currently at $10,000. This program this year was fully subscribed to my great satisfaction and pleasure. We did get a letter of support from Y to Y suggesting that we increase this to $20,000. Thinking back on previous council messages, I forget the total cost that we thought that it would take to actually deal with this problem. 280,000, something like that? Yeah, something along those lines.
So it was last year. I thought it was closer to 60. I could pull it, but for 2024, it's $10,000 in the operating budget.
Okay.
For the grant program / town removal, all in one.
And this year, I'm assuming that the town didn't use any of that money to remove our own issues. Is that correct?
I believe that's true. It was fully subscribed this year.
Yeah. But we did remove some trees. Anyways.
Can I suggest, in order, in the name of, because I'm actually interested in this as well.
Thank you.
That we don't make a motion at this time, but we request information about how much is in the budget, how it was used this past year.
Happy to do it that way.
And then we can make an informed decision. By the way, I was actually going to be suggesting you go up to 30,000, with 10,000 of it being earmarked directly towards fruit trees on town land.
Well, I would certainly
So
support that.
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a 0.06% increase. It's very, very small. And a buck, basically, be about
So
buck something per year per tax roll, and what's the cost of a bear's life, right?
So I'm not asking for a motion. We're just going to ask for information. Thank you very much.
So, does anybody? I think there's general. I saw some nodding heads. So, if we could just ask for that information around the fruit tree removal, okay. And then we'll come back to that, because I think it is important to come back to. Okay, anything else that somebody would like to request information on? Especially if it hasn't been part of our formal presentation we received today, it's good to get information if you think there's something you're going to want to address. And there'll be other opportunities. This is just the first one. I think withdrawn at this point till we get the other. Oh, we weren't going to go by way of motion, but we're just making an information request. Okay. Okay. Seeing nothing else, then I move that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously.